because I'd like to frame this question of what is smart by thinking about some of the fundamental principles of great city building, because at a very basic level, if we don't get the fundamental principles of city building right first, there's really no technological fix. There is no way that we can bring in infrastructure that will remediate the kinds of places that are going to be livable in the long term. So a critical part of creating a smart city, from my perspective, and of course I come from this conversation not from analytics and data, but from a place-making lens, from the question, as my colleague has implied, the question of how do we make friendly, livable cities, places where people are going to thrive over the long term. So just a few slides just to point out some of the fundamental tenets that I believe we need to get first right in order to build a smart city. The City of Toronto, for those of you who are unfamiliar, of course is in the North American context. You can see there's a little key map on the bottom there. We are the country above America, not a part of America. And you can see right in the center of that slide, there's some darker areas. Those are the 5 Great Lakes. We actually live in the largest freshwater region in the entire world. And Toronto is right in the very center, very close to the American border. You mentioned Vancouver, but in fact in Toronto as well, 49% of our population is foreign-born. So this is one of our greatest assets, that there's a tremendous amount of diversity. And we are also one of the most densely populated regions in the Toronto context. One of the questions with respect to smartness in the City of Toronto and in our region is how we get density right. You cannot, for example, provide broadband to a neighborhood if you don't have the right density, if your density is too low, or even if your density is too high. So getting density right is a critical part of creating a livable city. Part of how we're seeking to do this is through regional planning. What you see here right in the center of this map is in fact the City of Toronto. The yellow parts are the built-up area. The green parts are our green belt. We have an urban green belt of approximately 2 million acres. That is a swath of land that redirects our growth into the built-up urban area. And this is a critical part of creating an intensified urban region with densities that allow for walkability and that allow for a more intensive kind of infrastructure. We also recognize that a critical part of what we need to do in the North American context is shift our planning paradigms and to focus on planning places for people. Anyone who's been to North America knows that we've spent the past generation planning around cars. We travel vast distances on a daily basis. Our environmental footprint on an individual basis is very large. Large homes on large lots that spread out over large distances. Part of the green belt is about beginning to create a more compact urban region. If we want to, for example, have evac systems where we have waste disposal through vacuum systems in our downtown core, it's not going to work if we are very spread out, simply because it costs too much to provide that infrastructure. So linking up the density with creating places for people is a very important part of our transformation. This is in fact a community that we're building out right now. It is right in great proximity to our downtown core. This is land that was industrial that is now becoming a community place where we're focusing on adding a high quality pedestrian realm. You can see just in the distance the CN Tower. This is within 10 kilometers of the downtown core. So looking at our lands that are in close proximity to the downtown and identifying how we can transform those lands for a more advanced kind of urbanism, more advanced kinds of uses, is a critical part of answering this question of smartness. We also recognize that to densify at the right scale, we need to better use our existing assets. This is the Distillery District in the downtown, which is a Victorian-era National Historic Site in the Canadian context that is a combination of uses that we've mixed up in a really significant way. It includes community spaces, universities, residences, artisan shops, mixing up these uses in an existing urban form and adapting this to be a place no longer for industry, but now for people, is a critical part of transforming to being a smart city in the future. We also recognize the importance in smartness of what is called urban repair. How can we transform the planning mistakes of the past? Now, this might be truly a North American problem. I'm not sure that it exists in the same way in the Italian context, but for us, part of being smart is looking at those planning mistakes we've made in the past and identifying how we can transform them. So you see here single-family homes and towers in a suburban context. We're now transforming this. You can see here a site plan for a specific community where we are infilling to begin to define a pedestrian realm, places where we have infill buildings. The white, taller buildings are the existing buildings. We're now defining street edges and public spaces by adding infill, by adding new rental housing, new affordable housing, new community spaces, new spaces for gathering, and this is all on the terminus of one of our new metro or new subway lines. Regent Park is another example of a community that is in the process of urban repair. We are taking down the old buildings and we're building new communities with new streets, a combination of low-rise buildings, mid-rise buildings, and tall buildings that includes an emphasis on affordable housing. This, in fact, was a very poor community with a tremendous amount of social unrest, and the objective has been to add market housing and to add new built forms and new public spaces so that this, in fact, becomes a very livable community. And this is an example of some of the commercial that's been added into the community environment. We also recognize urbanizing our avenues, and I'm embarrassed to show you the next slide, but this, in fact, you don't see the transition here, but this is a typical strip mall or big box power center where you would see very low-rise uses. And we're transforming this kind of an environment. This is what it looks like today, transforming this environment to become a mid-rise urban community. This is the plan that we approved approximately 2 months ago at City Council to add a variety of ways of movement, cycling lanes, widened sidewalks, LRT on the green band down the middle, and mid-rise building to repair the urban environment to add density that now allows for long-term sustainability. And lastly, we recognize a critical part of smart cities is transforming the conversations that we have about our cities. We need to build capacity and build understanding around city building in new ways. And there's a variety of ways we're doing this. We're focusing on large-scale neighborhood planning and inviting communities into that conversation. I host chief planner roundtables in City Hall where we bring in outside experts from a whole variety of disciplines, universities, the private sector, the not-for-profit sector, to problem solve on our most critical issues, such as how we're planning for climate change. We also have an initiative called Planners in Public Space, where we go into the public spaces in the city and we plan with communities right in their neighborhoods for transformation. And then lastly, we're looking at how we draw new Canadians, those 49% who are foreign born, into the conversation to create broad buy-in for community change. So as a way of introduction, those are some of the ways that we're thinking about smart cities from a planning lens right at the outset.
Thank you very much. You can do it. Yeah. That's great. I'm sure that will be some